The crisis of silent toxicity among children. The WHO has published important reports documenting in detail the impacts of unhealthy environments on children's health. The most recent of these reports, Inheriting a Sustainable World, Atlas on Children's Health and the Environment, was published in 2017. A major finding that emerged from the work of the WHO is that chemical, physical, and biological hazards in the environment are responsible for 23% of deaths worldwide and for 26% of all deaths in children under the age of 5 years. This powerful conclusion continues to shape global health policy to this day. Subclinical toxicity is the concept that toxic chemicals can cause health problems in children without producing any symptoms. Subclinical toxicity is also called silent toxicity. While subclinical poisoning does not cause obvious symptoms, its damage can be significant and can be observed on IQ tests, X-rays, lung function tests or other evaluations of children's health. By contrast, when poisoning is caused by exposure to a high dose of a toxic chemical, the symptoms are severe and very obvious. Acute high-dose childhood lead poisoning produces profound symptoms such as seizures, brain damage and death. Severe, acute methyl mercury poisoning causes profound mental retardation in children exposed in the womb. An episode of acute methyl mercury poisoning occurred in Minamata, Japan, in the 1950s and 60s and caused profound mental retardation in children who were exposed in utero after their mothers ate fish from water contaminated by mercury waste from an industrial plant. In fact, severe, high-dose poisoning is like the tip of the iceberg, in which we only see the small, visible part of something much bigger. On the other hand, subclinical toxicity is the much larger, less visible part of the iceberg that escapes notice until it is specifically sought out. Its subtle health problems can be missed by parents, and they are not evident on a standard pediatric examination. Hence, they are called subclinical. They can be found only through special testing, such as IQ testing or neurobehavioral assessment. In the case of lead poisoning, subclinical toxicity was first recognized in the 1970s in studies of children exposed to lead. The largest and most important of the studies were directed by pediatrician and child psychiatrist Herbert L. Needleman. His meticulous clinical and epidemiological evaluations demonstrated that even very low levels of lead exposure that produce no obvious symptoms are nonetheless able to cause silent brain injury in children, resulting in a reduction in intelligence, shortening of attention span, and alteration of behavior. Long-term follow-up of the children exposed to lead found that they went on to have elevated rates of reading difficulties, school failure, and incarceration. The studies by Needleman and others made it clear that subclinical toxicity with damage to the brain and nervous system can cause significant injury in children that lasts a lifetime. Subclinical toxicity caused by methyl mercury has been identified in infants exposed prenatally to methyl mercury at levels too low to produce obvious symptoms. A study in New Zealand showed that children exposed to methyl mercury prenatally had a 3-point decrease in IQ as well as alterations in their behavior. Moreover, a large study of prenatally exposed children in the Faroe Islands of Denmark also found evidence that children had impairments in memory, attention, language, and visual spatial perception. The severity of the impairments was directly related to the degree of exposure to methyl mercury. Another study in the Seychelles Islands also showed some evidence of prenatal neurotoxicity. The U.S. National Academy of Sciences reviewed these studies and concluded that there is now strong evidence showing methyl mercury can damage an unborn child's brain and nervous system, even at very low levels of exposure. The concept of subclinical toxicity has now expanded well beyond lead and methyl mercury to include a wide range of toxic chemicals that cause adverse effects in multiple organ systems in children. While subclinical effects may be relatively tolerable at the individual level, the aggregate effects at a population level can have far-reaching economic and social consequences. In fact, widespread exposures to toxic chemicals that damage the developing brain and nervous system are especially dangerous, because the damage caused by these chemicals is silent and it is not easily detected without knowing how to look for it. It is not identified by the usual national health and well-being statistics kept by most countries and may continue unabated for a long time. At peak use in the 1970s, annual consumption of tetrethyl lead in petrol in the US was nearly 100,000 tons. Virtually all of this lead was released into the environment through the exhaust pipes of cars and lorries. It caused extensive environmental contamination, especially within cities and along roadways. The average blood lead level of US children was close to 20 g/Dl. Globally, many thousands of children born in that era suffered unrecognized brain injury, with loss of IQ points, shortening of their attention span, and disruption of behavior as the result of their exposure to lead from petrol. It is estimated that the epidemic of subclinical lead poisoning may have reduced the number of children with higher intelligence, IQ scores above 130 points, by over 50% and likewise caused a more than 50% increase in the number with IQ scores below 70. In the US alone, the total number of children at risk of exposure to airborne lead during the 40 years of its use was approximately 100 million. As a result of widespread exposure to lead worldwide, there was an increase in the number of children who did poorly in school, who required special education and other remedial programs, and who could not contribute fully to society when they became adults. At the same time, there was a reduction in the number of children with higher intelligence scores. Damage to a society by toxic chemicals can be catastrophic and has been so throughout history. Some historians have speculated that the fall of the Roman Empire may have been caused by widespread lead poisoning. It is known that the Romans used lead, which is a very soft metal, to line the aqueducts carrying water from the mountains to their towns. Roman citizens' exposure to lead in their water supply may have caused a loss of intelligence and diminished fertility, especially among the upper classes, who also used a special concoction of lead to strengthen the flavor of their wines. Copyright Academy House www.academy.house